again, my name is Maurice. I use he and him pronouns. I'm the co-executive director of the Action Center on Race and the Economy. We're a campaigns hub. We help out organizations that are doing campaigns on anything that has to do with sort of finance and the economy as it relates to racial justice issues. So I want to talk about how this pandemic in particular weighs on budgets and the long-term implications of it as such, especially in how those things sort of intersect. And I'm going to start with the nature of police budgets in particular. So I know that we all have, many of us have likely been in the streets actually yelling about defunding the police, present company included, and why that is primarily, why that's a very important thing to do in this moment. And I want to stress that that's, before I sort of get into it, that's primarily an important thing for the structural change in the power that the police have, and as a step towards abolishing the police altogether. And the primary argument there is not an economic one. We don't want to sort of cut their budgets and then make them more efficient. We want to actually structurally challenge their power, and that's kind of the root of the defund messaging. However, as an important exercise of just how powerful the police currently are, you can look at their budgets, that saying that, budgets are moral documents. So I'm actually going to share my screen to show a new tool that we just developed that digs into the morals of the top 300 cities by population in the United States. I'm going to pick on a couple of cities in particular, just because they were at the top of my mind, and I think that they are good examples, different cities in terms of both size, parts of the country they're in, demographics, culture, etc. So let me hope that the screen share works. It actually says it's been disabled by the host. If one of the co-hosts can make me a co-host, it would solve the problem.
Thanks, Maurice. We're going to work on it.
So as I get into that, I can kind of explain how we created this tool. So our researchers went into the budget documents of every single city of the top 300 cities in the country. We went and looked at their most recent confirmed budget, and then we crunched some numbers to find lots of different things. And the first of which we're sort of releasing is just the percentages of how big those budgets are as they relate to the overall city's budget. So you should be able to see my screen now, and I'm going to start with the city of Los Angeles just because the number is so unbelievably big. So, and you can, if you go onto the site, it's costofpolice.org, you can play around in it yourself. So Los Angeles, their overall budget is about $5.3 billion. That's billion with a B. They spend 52% of that on the police. So you might think, what could you possibly spend $2.7 billion on when it comes to the police? Well, there are a tremendous amount of Los Angeles police officers, of course. If you've ever been to LA, you see them literally everywhere. But also LA has bought lots of other things for the police. So they have multiple tanks, they have multiple aircrafts, they have all sorts of weaponry that you certainly do not need in order to just peacefully run any sort of public service department. I'm going to go to where I live, which is Detroit, Michigan. Obviously way smaller budget than Los Angeles, but still pretty sizable. Spending 30% on our police. This is a city that is extremely Black and also still recovering from being one of the hardest hit cities as it relates to the last recession. And that chunk, nearly a third of our budget going to the police, really prevents us from doing a tremendous amount of good things in our city. Finally, I'll just look at Tulsa, Oklahoma, just because it's been in the news, a city that's a little bit different than the first two. 36% on the police. So Tulsa has a housing crisis. There's all sorts of infrastructure needs there, and spending over a third on their police budget. So you can see that, all of these cities that we know need more services and have the ability to provide these services, but instead pour millions and millions, in one case billions, into the police budget. New York, which wasn't featured, has a $6 billion police budget. And it shows you just how embedded policing is in the very fabric of our government, and that there's no path to reform here, that it must be abolished. So we should know that, of course, whenever money is involved, that Wall Street, one of my #1 villains, will take advantage. So my organization recently released a report on what we titled police brutality bonds, which are bond instruments that cities issue to pay police brutality settlements. Those settlements are crucially important and almost always lower than they should be. Someone has just gone through an unbelievably traumatic event, or you've lost a family member. So this sort of, so we highlight this to really show how embedded this really, the nature of policing is in our society, and the fact that we have to be focusing on abolishing the police and really changing the economic system that we're in, because capitalism will always look for profit, even if it's at the expense of Black death. So finally, I'll say that the real cost to the budget and society of police is likely to go way farther than the numbers that you'll see on this website, costofpolice.org, or if you go and look up your own city budget, in case it's not on that website. For one, our site doesn't feature budgets about prisons or correctional facilities, and we know that once we add those numbers in, some of the cities jump up tremendously in terms of percentage. And also, and this is sort of another reason why we think that the defunding the police is not merely an economic argument, it often doesn't include things like surveillance cameras or individuals who play a role of pseudo police, who just sort of connect the police to incidents that are happening. Policing, the nature of policing is woven into so many different parts of our budget that it's actually difficult to get all of the other pieces in for particular places. So one of the things that ACRE is working on is a broader analysis of what the total cost of policing is in a few places that we hope to release soon. This, of course, all sits on top of a pandemic that is poised to widen the wealth gap. On April 1st, about 1/3 of the renters in the country didn't pay rent. That number was likely higher on June 1st as the peanuts that the government gave folks faded away. And we hear that no more assistance is coming. For Black communities, especially, that lost so much during the foreclosure crisis, something that I saw up close and personal at the housing organization I worked with in that time, we know that the next hit is going to mean a extreme rise in homelessness and death and ruined lives and broken families, and maybe a spread further of the pandemic as well. So we have to be pushing for rent to be canceled and other housing solutions. And then finally, if we're going to get through any of these three crises, as Michelle and others have said, Black folks are dying at disproportionate rates and are the ones who are being put at risk actually for a small period of time. The unemployment gap, which has been this historical indicator of how racist the country is, closed because Black and brown workers were the ones who were doing those essential jobs, those risky jobs that were keeping us all safe. It's now, as people are starting to open back up, widened, and probably going to widen even greater as the Black employees who were laid off are likely not to be hired back in many cases. So if we're going to make it through these crises, we need to dismantle the systems that are in reality and also in our head, and take that police are not keeping us safe, they don't serve the working class, and they're not workers and they need to be abolished, that Wall Street can't save us from any problems that we have, and that we need to fund communities. We already have the solution for how to do things like, educate children properly. You actually just need to pay for that. It's all, I've laid it out all so simply at the end here. It's obviously extremely difficult, but that's what we need to push towards if we're going to have a society following this.